I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, President-elect Donald Trump, who continues to confound the conventional political community with surprise after surprise. This week, Donald Trump met with the New York Times and came out with policy positions that reach across the divide. First, Trump categorically rejected the alt-right and said he did not want their support. This is after Trump appointed the former executive chief of the far-right news website Breitbart, Steve Bannon, to be his chief strategist. After criticizing Donald Trump for not repudiating those associated with supremacist groups, Donald Trump went out and did just that. President-elect Trump also took a step back from dismissing climate change, and he announced that for the sake of national harmony and peace, he was no longer interested in prosecuting Hillary Clinton for the email debacle. Donald Trump also went against all conventional political punditry by immediately reaching across the aisle, consulting with Senator Chuck Schumer and Representative Nancy Pelosi, Democrat Senate minority and House leaders, in an offer to work with them for the good of the country. And Senator Schumer responded that while Democrats would always challenge President Trump were he to adopt a policy they disapproved of, Donald Trump did indeed propose policies which reflect the Democrat agenda, on trade, for example, and that the Democratic Party stood willing to cooperate wherever possible in a bipartisan manner. None of this was predicted. What Trump critics predicted was tantamount to a fascist Nazi state in which all civil liberties would be trampled upon, where the economy would be rigged to benefit only the rich, and where minorities and the American underclass would be exploited in a brutal and callous manner, and loudest of all, were Jewish quarters warning of an emergence of a virulent anti-Semitism that would mirror Hitler's Germany of the 1930s. Now, you've heard on JBS both Alan Dershowitz and David Harris argue for the opposite, arguing for a responsible wait-and-see approach while being ever vigilant, but always intellectually and emotionally honest, and giving the new president-elect every opportunity to succeed. And we've said repeatedly here on JBS that such an approach reflects the best of America and the best of the American Jewish and liberal communities. The question is, to what extent do others share this view? For some comment and analysis, we're pleased now to be joined for the first time on our JBS phones by the editor-in-chief of perhaps World Jewry's leading online resource for Jewish, Israel, and Middle East news, the Algemeiner, Dovid Efune. Dovid, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to JBS.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Mark.
Thank you. First of all, Dovid, you published a piece the day the nation learned Donald Trump would be our next president, in which you said any careful observer of the 2016 election should have known that Donald Trump was going to win. Dovid, did you know that Donald Trump would defeat Hillary Clinton?
Well, I don't think anybody can say that they knew with absolute certainty. And once it happens, when it actually happens and it becomes real, I think it was shocking to everybody. Having said that, for quite some time, including back in May on my Facebook page and in private conversations with others, we've been suspecting that the climate in the country was leading towards a Trump victory. And I think what it boiled down to was understanding what was afoot here and making an effort to try and understand what his supporters were concerned about. And it boils down to this. There was a growing frustration, a tremendous frustration with people who were supporting Trump, with the political elites, the political class, political overreach and political correctness. And in that respect, Donald Trump was seen as almost a punishment to Washington. He was to be inflicted on Washington. They were so frustrated with what Washington represented, that everything that Trump was being criticized for, not caring about convention and standards for manners or dealing with people, was exactly what his supporters felt Washington needed. Somebody who could go in there, not care about the consequences, shake things up, change things. And it seems that this X factor, as some have called it, was so widespread, and many in the mainstream media failed to understand that really the rules of the game had changed. It wasn't about policies anymore. It wasn't even about demographics. It wasn't about ground game and fundraising and all the other components that usually make for election chatter. There was something new at play here, and once we saw it enacted, I think if we were watching closely, it shouldn't really have come as such a surprise.
Mm-hmm. By the way, you know, among all the things that Americans tend to reject, if not despise, is the mainstream media as well. And many of the things that the mainstream media was just hammering on every single day, ultimately, it seems that a large swath of the American people absolutely discounted it. Do you find that there was some real disillusionment with the mainstream media?
Yes, it's absolutely the case, but another evolution which played a major role in Trump's victory was the changing face of the entire media landscape. So legacy media, or what we might call dictatorial journalism, where essentially journalism is a top-down enterprise at most of the mainstream media outlets, where editors are setting the tone. They're deciding what's important, what goes on the front pages, what people should be outraged about. The New York Times very famously says in the top right-hand corner, all the news that's fit to print. But if you think about it, that's probably the most arrogant thing any editor could ever say, because, of course, it's subjective. Every single person has different priorities and different perspectives and different ideas on what's important and what's not important. And whereas that tone of condescension has been prevalent for such a long time in media, we're seeing now a process that we call the democratization of media, where Donald Trump, and he mentioned this in his first CBS 60 Minutes interview, was able to speak directly to 60 million people, 30 million people between his Facebook and his Twitter accounts. And obviously those people were sharing it with tens or hundreds of thousands of others. So parallel to whatever the mainstream media was saying, there was an alternate universe of messaging, which sometimes was bigger and stronger. I mean, some of Trump's videos were watched multiple millions of times. I saw in a report today in Forbes about the role that Jared Kushner played in the campaign, that his early videos were seen 76 million times. Mm-hmm. Now, with the New York Times publishing 2 million copies a day, so that's the equivalent of being on the front page of the Times for almost a month straight, or more than a month straight. So that's the kind of exposure he was able to get directly. And that evolution in media was fundamental to his ability to reach people directly, bypass the influence of the mainstream media, and win the support that he did.
Dovid, to what extent did hate play a role in this election? There are those, especially those in the Jewish community, who feel that Donald Trump appealed to the darkest side of America, and that he won because he garnered and generated hate for the immigrant, for the underclass, for the illegal immigrant who came across the border, who even for Jews, and that this white supremacist movement was behind the Trump victory. To what extent does any of that resonate with you?
Well, I think the first thing, and there's no question that Trump is a populist politician, and I think the danger of all populist politicians, certainly when it comes to Jews and other minorities, is that they can often motivate racial factors or racist factors in society. And it really works on both sides. I can tell you one thing, when Bernie Sanders was banging on about the 1%, to a lot of people that means Jews. And we saw the burning of flags outside of Israeli flags outside the Democratic Party convention. So I think this is a danger when you talk about populist politicians in general. Having said that, I do think it's important to put everything in place. I don't believe that there was a massive wave of racist sentiment that brought Trump to victory. In fact, a good example of that, if you have a look at the ADL's study on anti-Semitic tweets from Trump supporters that they put out a little while ago, and it created a big storm. In that study, there were 2.6 million tweets that they identified, and it sounds like a very large number. But what the study also says is that 69% of those tweets came from 1,600 accounts. Now, to begin with, it's a question of how 1,600 accounts could tweet 1.8 million tweets, and it opens the possibility that some of them may have been robots or other manifestations of technological amplification that made it look bigger than it actually was. And don't get me wrong, one anti-Semitic tweet is a terrible thing. But I think it's important to put things into context. When you're talking about 60-plus million people that voted for President-elect Trump versus 1,600 people that are expressing these views. Having said that, the fact that they have latched onto his coattails and seen this as an opportunity to come out of the boroughs on the margins where they belong is not a good thing. And I think it's incumbent upon us as a community, in a constructive way, in a positive way, to call on the president-elect to do more in this regard, to disavow this behavior. And I think he's starting to do that, and I think we're going to see more. The danger, of course, and this is the argument that's always made on the other side, is that by calling out these people by name every time David Duke says something offensive, you're elevating his own platform. Mm-hmm. So I think the smart thing for the campaign to do at this point, or for the emerging administration, rather, to do at this point, is to speak out once, disavow individuals, yes, call them out by name, but start a few initiatives. An initiative together with Twitter would be a fantastic idea, to stamp out hatred, to block users who are tweeting aggressively harassing Jewish journalists, etc., and other such initiatives which turn this into an ongoing effort. Because the truth is, it should be an ongoing effort in our society to stamp out this kind of hatred, to keep it relegated to the margins, and not allow it to gain the kind of traction that it has.
Mm-hmm. Bottom line for you, Dovid, do you fear a Donald Trump administration?
I don't fear a Donald Trump administration at all. I think the right approach is cautious optimism. There are some people that are elated. They think the Messiah has already arrived, especially on the right wing of Israel. I don't think that's the right approach. I think there are great opportunities on a whole host of different fronts, including with the Iran deal, including with resetting the harmful daylight policy of the Obama administration, including in Israeli-Palestinian talks and peacemaking. I think we're going to see from this administration a supportive role as opposed to a role of imposition. And even on domestic policy, the president-elect spoke while he was campaigning about assigning $25 billion to fund private school tuition in tax credits, which could do absolute wonders for Jewish education in this country. Now, having said that, the concern that a lot of people have is real, and it should not be belittled in the slightest. There is no question that certain racist and anti-Semitic elements have become emboldened and have attached themselves to the Trump presidency. Our work should not be to fear, but to look at the problem in the eyes, to encourage, to push, to fight back, and knock these people right back down to where they came from, hopefully to never see the light of day again.
That's beautifully said, Dovid. Look, you well know some 70% of the American Jewish community is basically in mourning over the impending Trump administration. And you touched on it already, but the feeling expressed by ADL National Director Jonathan Greenblatt and by URJ President Rabbi Rick Jacobs, many others on the liberal side of the Jewish aisle, they believe that a Trump administration is simply going to be racist, xenophobic, misogynistic, and anti-Semitic. And they suggest that that is why Trump won. My own feeling is, and I'd love you to comment on this, the group that put Trump over the top, the group that won him, Wisconsin, Michigan, perhaps Pennsylvania, Florida, were Obama Democrats who decided to vote for Trump. It was not white racist America that gave us Donald Trump. It was a lack of outpouring of the Obama coalition that voted for him in 2008, 2012. And there were lovely, bright, intelligent, educated, white, college and women, and a higher percentage of Latinos, a higher percentage of African Americans that voted for Mitt Romney, all voting for Donald Trump, and there were the Obama Democrats. And if it were not for them, Donald Trump would not have won Wisconsin, would not have won Michigan, would not be president of the United States. I find the fact that that is never discussed by the Jewish community, to be somewhat disappointing. What's your reaction?
Well, I think that's absolutely correct. That in this election, and it certainly seems to be unique in a historical context, policies and certainly issues of race, I don't think were the major factor here at all. This was nothing less than a referendum on politicians and politics and the political elites and the political establishment. And that brought together a very broad coalition of the disenfranchised that carried Trump to victory. I think that there are a number of Jewish groups, as you've said, who have been voicing concern. You know, as a publication, we hear from every single Jewish group when they have something to say, when there's a press release or a statement or a comment, it's in our inbox. And one of the benefits is that because we're speaking to everybody, we're able to kind of gauge the pulse of the community and see whether this issue is a consensus issue or whether there is a division along party or other lines. So, for example, on the Iran deal, it was almost unanimous opposition from throughout the entire community. When President-elect Trump was first announced, it was almost unanimous. Everybody had positive messages saying that they look forward to working with the president-elect. On the issue of the appointment of Steve Bannon and similar issues, the bulk of the mainstream Jewish community, I'm talking AJC, B'nai B'rith, Conference of Presidents, Simon Wiesenthal Center, World Jewish Congress, and others, I think their approach was, wait and see, we're not going to jump on everything over here, and we don't think the evidence against this guy is strong enough to be making a statement. Those that came out against it, including the National Jewish Democratic Council, which is a partisan group, including Ben the Ark, which is a highly partisan group, and then you have the Reform Judaism and the ADL were the other two main groups that I saw that came out. And it seems a shame to me that in doing so, they actually assigned themselves to a partisan position, because this clearly wasn't a consensus issue within the community. And to me, it's a shame, because groups like the ADL and Union for Reform Judaism should really be above the fray on issues like this, and should be able to speak to both parties. And I hope that they haven't damaged themselves by coming out so strongly on an issue that was not a consensus issue by any means.
Again, very interesting. It's hard for me to pigeonhole the ADL, but the Reform movement has always taken a very liberal stand on American politics, on American social issues. It's not a surprise at all that the URJ would come out so strongly against what they call is, again, racism and xenophobiaism and those who are misogynistic. Right. So that doesn't surprise me. And not only that, I'm not critical of the Reform movement for taking that position ideologically. What bothers me is I wanted to see a more, what I consider to be a more responsible approach. You heard me mention Alan Dershowitz, you heard me mention David Harris, and their attitude was they weren't giving anybody a pass. All they were saying is, he is our president. He won fair and square. And again, he won because Obama Democrats put him in the White House. And they're arguing, wait and see, and be vigilant. If something is done that is in some way counter to our values, then we should respond. But there is, in grassroots, Dovid, and I don't know whom you talk to personally. I don't know the social set you're in, but many of grassroots American Jews really feel that a grave injustice has been done and that America has taken a turn toward the dark side. That's how Jews feel. And as a result, when there are groups like the ADL or the URJ, which expresses this sentiment, they're applauded. And people are genuinely worried that anti-Semitism and Nazi fascism is right around the corner. If if you and I were speaking to them in person today, Dovid, what's your message?
Well, look, as I said earlier on, and I reiterate that, I wouldn't say for a second that this concern is illegitimate. It's absolutely legitimate, and there is no question that throughout the climate of this election, on both sides, but now you're talking about the president-elect and the side of the victor, it has given rise to increased rhetoric and empowerment of people that are hostile towards the Jewish community. But I think the important thing to think of, that I would urge people to think, is as follows. There is a big difference between being an anti-Semite and then not doing enough to combat anti-Semitism. One, I would say, disqualifies one from public office, and one doesn't. And I think the approach to a leader who is going to be at the helm of this country or surrounding the president, who is seen not to be doing enough to combat anti-Semitism, the correct, productive approach is to take a constructive and collaborative tone, which I think the responsible Jewish groups have done. It's not to attack. You can attack somebody who is anti-Semitic. Somebody who's not doing enough to combat anti-Semitism, I don't believe should be attacked. They should be encouraged, and they should be educated, and they should be offered all of the resources at our disposal to help them with that important task. And if they're still ignoring it months into the job, and if the problem continues, then you can start with the criticism. Mm-hmm. But to jump down the emerging administration's throat before they've even had a chance to name the chief of staff or the Secretary of State or Defense Minister, you've got to give them a little chance to breathe. Now's the time to be supportive and to help towards this issue, to help show the way, and to help provide resources in how to combat the rhetoric that we've seen, as opposed to immediately creating an obstruction and adversary, which doesn't help towards the bottom line of getting this issue shunned and dealt with.
Again, that's beautifully said. And my only slight difference with you, and here you and I both are at the helm of a Jewish media operation. And my own position, Dovid, has been that I wanted to be as neutral as I could be. It was hard to do when the entire Jewish community, I shouldn't say entire, a large segment of the Jewish community really didn't like Trump and wanted me to reflect their attitude. And here at this desk, David, I've received both scathing emails and letters from those who think I'm on the right and those who think I'm on the left. Nobody likes me. Everybody's angry at me. But I do want to say this, and then I want to hear your response. I am not in any way convinced at all that there is virulent anti-Semitism around the corner. And when you say that the ADL finds it all comes from 1,600 sites, that to me is what the real issue is. Is there anti-Semitism in America? Of course there is. Is it in any way institutional? Is it in any way supported? Is it going to be a threat to American Jews? No. And again, I don't ever want to put my head in the sand, and I'm going to get emails that I'm naive, but the bottom line for me is America is still an extraordinary social experiment, and the American people are basically good people, thoughtful people. And sometimes they vote for a Barack Obama, and sometimes they vote for a Donald Trump. And they're good either way. And they see things in their own way, but they do the best they can. So the only disagreement I have with you is, I don't believe that anybody in the Jewish community should be suggesting to the American Jewish community that anti-Semitism is at the moment a serious threat because Donald Trump has been elected president. But I want to hear what you have to say.
No, I agree with that 100%, and I hope I didn't indicate otherwise. I certainly don't believe that it's around the corner or something that we should be fearful of. Having said that, I do understand and appreciate those that are concerned, because if you are a journalist with a Jewish last name and people are tweeting you images of gas chambers or even sending threatening letters or items to your place of work or to your address, it's completely understandable the fear and the concern that many people have. Whether as you say, whether there is an emerging neo-Nazi climate in America that's around the corner, I'm 100% with you. I don't think that's the case. We're talking about a small group of people that has become quite vocal, but a very, very small group of people. It's important for us to understand the context of that.
Okay.
I would add one point which I think is important, if we have time. Do we have time?
You know, David, I wish the clock never gave me a problem. Unfortunately, we're about to run out of time. And I wanted to say to you, who are you? You're doing fabulous work. Where were you born?
I was born in England.
And you came to America.
So I'm a newcomer to this country.
Well, you're doing fabulous work. I want you to come into the studio and let me do a L'chaim hour with you. And I'd love to get to know you better. You are thoughtful.
Tell me when. It would be my pleasure.
Okay, you're very, very sweet. And then, if you don't mind, I'm going to call on you often for both insight and analysis. In the meantime, I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha, and we'll see you very, very soon.
That's very kind. You too. All the best.
Thank you very much. The thoughts of Dovid Efune, editor-in-chief of the Algemeiner. I loved meeting him, and I thought he spoke very, very well. The theme remains the same. The theme is Donald Trump is president. Every day, he seems to be softening his stance. Nobody should be surprised. Every day, he seems to be bringing more and more people from across the political spectrum into his world to see who should become the cabinet that will help run this country. And I just am moved by the David Harrises and the Alan Dershowitzes and the Dovid Efunes who are trying to tell all of us it's too early to say Kaddish. It's too early to say the sky is falling. It's wholly inappropriate to see Nazis around every corner. America is a marvelous community, and that by and large people voted for Donald Trump because, as Dovid said, they were furious at a system that they felt was intellectually and emotionally dishonest and had been the same for 4 years after 4 years after 4 years, and finally they had enough. My thanks, as always, to Sloan Copeland, Serge Goldberg, to Associate Director Dara Golub, to editors Dennis Golan and John McDevitt, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.